Namaskar and welcome to this exciting show, Sathology Debunking Mythology, new episode. And here we have a very prominent guest who is writing a very unique concept. But we have already seen in the ancient history of India, the main vehicles of social change and the social community development were the temples. And that's why, if you see invaders, faith based colonialists, such as the British and especially Islamists, they destroyed temples in a big way. Uh, in the case of Mahabharat, we see that Yudhishthir used to give most of his charity to some large temples. And those large temples will run schools, free medicine, and research, scientific research, not just temples, but a source for for community service. And today we have a very prominent person who has done extensive research on this. Without delay, let us welcome Sri Sandeep Singh.
Namaste. Thanks for
Namask-
having me.
Namaskar. It's a very unique topic that you are researching on, and uh, and I have read so many things on Mahabharata and Ramayana, but how temples were not just places of worship. Temples were places of social change, research, thought process. All the intelligent people revolve around it, and that's why the temples were so huge, very huge. Especially when you look at the Vedic time cycle of Dwapari Paricharyayam. When they say that in Bhagavatam, so Paricharya means it's a huge thing, including free medicines were part of the temple. So you'll see huge temple complexes, not just one temple. So, what is this temple economics that you talk about?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity and letting me talk to you and talk to a lot of people through you. So, I'm grateful for that. Yeah, as you rightly said, temple is a very old, as old as India or as old as Bharat, not India. And our economy revolves around temple. Temple is the nucleus of our economy. And this has been the concept since time immemorial. From the time you can recall, the temples are there. And any economy which revolves around the temple, I call it as a temple economy. So I'll give you an example rather than getting into big definitions. So if you just look at the ritual part of it, so anytime any ritual that you see, we just write it off as a ritual, but actually it is not. Generally, there is a whole lot of science involved. There's a whole lot of economics involved in it. So I'll give you a small example. I'll talk in examples. So if you start with when you used to go to a lake or a river, which is holy, we'll throw coins in that. And some of us would have thrown, some of us would have laughed, or might have done both, calling it superstitious and all those kind of things. But if you notice, initially the coins used to be of gold, then silver, then bronze, and nowadays you've got paper and plastic, all that. But if you look today's water purifier ads, all of advertise saying there is silver in it, because silver helps purify the water. So when you used to throw the coin, the concept was that if I've come to this religious holy place, dharmic place, there might have been pollution because of me, and let me put some coins which will keep purifying it. And hence you throw some silver or a gold coin in the river or a lake, and in the riverbed it will go down and settle it there, and it will keep purifying the water. So it was a scientific concept. So it was not designed, just like that. Or if you talk about the rituals, when we offer so many variety of prasad to the god, so there was a study which said that, in India there was a time we used to have more than 8 lakh variety of rice. Today, hardly 8,000 odd are left. And most of them are left because of rituals which are aligned to the temple, because in different temples, we have different kind of rice to be offered. And that's why only those rice have survived. Rest of the rice variety we have lost. So that is the important of when I talk about the temple economics. It's not only financial transaction, but the whole economy of preserving our intellectual property. That has happened because of temples.
One of the things which is very is recorded by the British also, that they could not find a single beggar on the street. And Macaulay recorded it,
Yeah.
and and they traveled the length and breadth of India, couldn't find a single beggar on the street. And we all know that most of the Mughals did not get out of the forts. They ruled from the forts and they stayed inside the forts.
Yeah.
So, and that is another mythology we already debunked, that they did not rule whole India. They were, otherwise they would
Yeah.
have destroyed more temples.
Correct.
So they were really living in their forts. Now, one of the things they say: free medicine, free education, and free education for all, free medicine for all, and free food for all.
Yeah.
And there was generally concept that 50-mile radius, 8 yojan around the temple, nobody should be hungry. And do you think that that was the best social welfare scheme?
Yes, that was one of the best social welfare schemes also. And if you look at it, when we talk about our temple, there is a concept of parikrama. You do 5 koshi parikrama, 10 koshi parikrama. It extends up to 120 koshi parikrama in some places. And then comes the kumbh. So basically what have used to happen that the whole money used to move around. There was a circulation of the wealth generated when people used to move around. So I'll give you a perfect example is that when the Sawan, the Kawad Yatra takes place, people carry water from river to Shiv Mandir. So there was a study that in 2 months' time, almost like 20 days to 25 days it lasts, and 60 lakh people carried those water in one Haridwar. And on average, they used to spend 300 rupees. It's almost 10-year-old study or maybe older. But if you put it was 60 lakh into 300 rupees, it's 180 crore rupees that got distributed or redistributed in and around the temple. So if you just think a government has to do it, more than 50% will get into administrative expenses. So when you talk about the pilgrimage, or when you talk about the ritual part of it, again, as I said, the Panchkoshi Parikrama or 32 Koshi Parikrama. So it was also a way of redistribution of wealth. People walked, they bought whatever was available on the roadside because there were a lot of restrictions. You cannot splurge money. You cannot do certain kind of luxurious thing. You walk barefoot and you come back. So the money was distributed to the bottom of pyramid, the most lower class of people. So it was a huge, strong economic impact. We might term it as a social welfare scheme.
Yeah. So one of the problems in the modern India has been the sanitation part. And you know, I know you're very knowledgeable, so it's just I'm looking in that aspect because Prime Minister Modi, people do not realize that what schemes that he launched, Swachh Bharat, and Americans were surprised because even the coronavirus also initially was very novel way of lockdowns, not forced lockdowns, and right now it looks like more forced because the virus is coming back, it's a rebound. But the Swachh Bharat campaign was already implemented through the temples in before, because there is no concept of you don't see any descriptions in the modern. If you look at 400-year back, also you won't see cities dirty, and there were large cities even that time. So so do you think this temple economics helped in keeping that cities straight clean also?
Yeah, I'm sure they must have because I'll take it back from temple to actually villages. If you look into villages, I've stayed for a long time in villages. I have a connect with the village, and when I used to get up, I used to see two things, very unique. At least in the villages I've stayed, my Nanial and Dada Dadi's place. So the men used to clean the house outside, and they will collect everything and used to have a huge area outside the house, and there was a fixed place where it will be kept, and by 7 a.m. it was collected, and women used to clean the house inside the house, and outside the house was the male member's responsibility, and it was 365 days I have seen it happening. So even if you go to the villages, they are very clean. I think in the modern urban planning, all those concepts came and people forgot the sewage part many times to put it in place. And that's how there's a very interesting thing written by Kushwant Singh. Like Britishers came to India, and that's how they learn how to take bath every day. Otherwise, it was a new concept to them. They never realized that they need to take bath. And if you go into European literature, you will find a whole lot of document in it how king used to take a bath and aristocracy used to be invited to see king taking a bath. Everybody was not allowed to take a bath also. So cleanliness was a concept always there in the temple. Before you entered, you clean up. The temples were always clean. It's just that of late, we started neglecting it, maybe in the disguise of secularism. That's how we got to see some of the temples not being very clean.
Another aspect of temple was I feel the buddhijeevi, like the intelligentsia, and they would revolve around the temples, meet over there, discuss plans for different philosophical research as well as material research. Do you see any recorded history of that also? Because we
Oh
have
yes,
yes.
oh yes. I'll talk about the science part of it. So I'll give you two examples. One is a very hard-hitting, I could say it. When Praful Chandra Ray, the famous scientist who gave us everything to develop chemistry in India, went on to write Hindu chemistry and set up Bengal Chemicals. When he was writing Hindu chemistry, before that he wrote a book called Rasayan, which is traditional in Hindu chemistry or a Bharatiya chemistry. So he was looking for the copy of that book and he was not able to find it. And he went around the length and breadth of the country. And ultimately, he found a copy of the book in the Raghunath Library, Mandir's library in Jammu. So, and it's written it in the preface of the book. He writes about it. So that's a very clear-cut evidence that how science was based in temples. And the other interesting example I talk about is of zero. The concept of zero, just like World War I and World War II, there is a two concept of maths war 1 and maths war 2. So it took almost 200 years for Europe and the church to accept the concept called zero because they couldn't digest the philosophical concept of it. Whether the zero means empty or zero encompasses everything in it. So how you look at it. And after that, from Kerala School of Mathematics originated integral calculus, the concept of infinity. So that again, European church took almost 200 years to accept it because they couldn't fathom something called infinity, what is there. And if you look in India, the oldest inscription of zero in the world, you'll find it in a temple in Gwalior. So I'll just share two examples here, from ancient time till very latest, till 1940s of Praful Chandra Ray, how the science or maths you could find in our temples.
Excellent point. I think nobody knows this, what you just spoke. I think hardly people must have noticed it. Now, temples are also a source of social change. You must have researched it a lot because if any money would be donated, because patratva is a very important concept in charity, according to Vedic scriptures. The qualified people should be given charity. So you'll see a lot of descriptions about Yudhishthir donating millions of cows, villages to Brahman. Now, these Brahmins are not just pujaris. Pujari is a different occupation. These are the thinkers, people like you, thinkers, or people who are researchers. And even Narad Muni is considered like a researcher more, and then the sage. And he has spoken on everything, right from Pancharatrika to politics. And Chanakya copied parts of it, and just parts of it, Chanakya became so famous. So the huge assembly of intelligentsia. So what do you think, in your study of the temple architectures and economics, have you seen any proofs of that they were all sitting in the temples and discussing things, making policies, and then giving a petition to the king to implement those policies? Have you captured that part of it?
See, what I have come across is that when Puri temple was built, the king invited 16 learned Brahmins from different parts, essentially from Ujjain, and there is a mandapam dedicated to them where they used to sit, deliberate, and advise to common man and to the government and to the governance part of it. So yes, I have found it, and even now, if you go in parts of Gujarat, I'm aware of where if there is a dispute, the panchayat or the village assembles in the temple premise, and there the decisions are taken. So the whole background being that in temple nobody will lie. Everybody is is scared of God or believes in God, so they will behave in a more dharmic way. So the judgments happen even now in Gujarat, in temples in many places.
There is a concept of panchayat which is very old. It's not introduced by any political party. The
Correct.
panchayat of concept is right from the Pandavas time,
Yes.
and five Panch Nayak Panchayat,
Yeah.
and so five important people from the society. And
Yeah.
generally, it is said that all the villages or small towns, people think that metropolises are a factor of today, but that's not true. Indraprasth was the first metropolis 5,000 years back. We can say that very confidently. And also Jayadrat's cities in Pakistan, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, these are all his kingdom. They were also very organized, large metropolises with all with the. So this, so have you recorded history where the panchayat would assemble in a local temple for Lok Sangraha? Because Lok Sangraha is the concept they use for the is a political philosophy that everything a politician should do, Lok Nayak or Lokpal should work for Lok Sangraha. So even Loktantra is also an old term. It's not America did
Correct.
not discover democracy. Somebody called
Yeah.
democracy as demon crazy, and you can see in American elections today. So
Yeah.
do you think all these things were also discussed over there in the temples?
See, in the temples, if you go, we had a lot of inscriptions found in various temples where they talked about such thing, and everything is written in detail. I'll tell you, there was a concept of wherever a land which was not fertile, they were to be given to the temple, and temple used to arrange irrigation for that. And within the temple, the decision was taken after the land used to become more cultivable, whom to give, and it was a collective decision. So the terms they use in different parts are different, but yeah, it was kind of panchayat who used to take a call, who will get this land, and so if you used to give to some land, what will he offer back to the temple? And it is very simple. They will offer flowers for everyday worship, or they will offer oil for the worship. So a small component of it will come back to temple, which will be used in the temple's puja. So you'll find this pattern across India. Unfortunately, in North India and rest, except in South, most of the places the temples have been destroyed. So you don't have many recorded evidence. So you have to go back to looking at temples in South India. And as you rightly mentioned, that if you look at the Meenakshi Puram temple, it has been said that whole cities used to be established, temple being the center. It was a rectangle form, and then the people who used to offer service most frequently will get to stay closer to the temple, and there is a second lane after that who will offer services less frequently, and so on and so forth. So all those things were built, and the whole ecosystem was set up along with the whole temple. So it was a self-sufficient economic ecosystem which was to be built whenever a temple was constructed. And just taking it point further, two more lines, is that how old, if you ask, temple economics is, So I said that if you look, do a search in US for a Rust Belt, you will come to know that Detroit and the whole belt called as a. So because it was a modern city, modern industry, car used to be manufactured. And so after that, sometime they realized making car cheaper. It's cheaper to make car in, India, Philippines, Korea, Japan. They shifted it, and industry died, ancillary unit died, and that will become Rust Belt. But if you look, some of the five, I'll give you five oldest cities in the world: Pushkar, Ujjain, Rameshwaram, Patliputra or Patna, and Varanasi. And they all are living civilization. People have stayed continuously, and they don't have any industry there, modern industry. So all survive around this temple. So it is a temple economics. Most dynamic example or a vibrant example is that the oldest city are still based around temples, and they are thriving. And if you look at a China or any manufacturing city, if the industry collapses, the city collapses.
I can say with proof that even today, Jagannath Puri temple, through their Anand Bazaar, feeds
Yeah,
30,000 people a day.
correct.
A day. So, and that is all coming from Jagannath Mahaprasad. So, it is a living example of how temples remove hunger, and the concept of taking people away from the temple has more to do with politics than of any logical reasoning. Do you agree to that?
Yeah, it's. I think it's more than politics. It's an attack of religions on the dharma. How we differentiate Hinduism being dharma. Because if you talk about, rightly mentioned about Anand Bazar, and I'm so glad that you mentioned it because we keep talking about caste. We don't eat together. If you go to eat at Anand Bazar, nobody asks. Everybody is allowed, and everybody sits and eats together. Nobody is going to ask which caste you are, or that is the best example. Everybody shares the same food. So it was done. I'm very open upfront on that to promote conversion, that you alienate people from temple, and the more you alienate, the easier it becomes to convert people. So, and then politicians, they don't apply their mind. They have known that you can divide and rule. That policy has worked for very long in India, and thankfully we are seeing a change uh, in from some time at least. And I hope this change continues completely, and we stop voting based on divide. So once we won't get divided, we won't vote based on caste lines. Politicians will be forced to talk about dharma and development.
So shopping malls have replaced the temples. Looks like. So people earlier times, and this is told to me by a friend in New Zealand, and he said that in the modern time, the shopping malls have become the new places of congregation. The word congregation is to congregate around a deity, and people, you know, uh, y- people waste their. I would say not waste. I would say because shopping malls will be angry at us, but people go there in a very religious way, like nowadays. And the window shopping has become the new phenomena. And earlier it used to be going to the temples and meeting people, other people, and it was a source of interaction, taking darshan of deities, walking around the deities and just seeing some kind of piety will fall on them. So what is this culture now?
Very interestingly, I'll come back to the temple towns economy and the modern economy example that I gave you, towns of modern economy. So every city, if you go and look, the first mall which started is no more there. It is closed, and some of them in Bombay have become car parking place also. Some have become offices. So every day there will be new mall with something new to offer, and old will close down. So they can never replace temples. And this now we have started seeing malls have been forced to enact Ram Mandir. Some of them have put up huge statues of 20 to 30 feet of Bhagwan Ram. So they've come back to dharma and religion. So what ultimately will attract people in India or Hindu. So so there are like a short-term things. Uh, as you said, they're like window shopping. We'll do it, we'll enjoy it, but after that, the fun is gone.
Yeah.
So if you saw that, other thing, look at the cool drink. There was a huge market, but now they don't have that kind of market share. People have gone back to more dharmic or Indic drinks like nariyal pani and nimbu pani. So they're like malls are more of a in a bigger thing. It's more like a window shopping. People think it's good, they go back. And I'll give you another small example. A minute is that initially when malls started in Bombay, you had a parking free. The bags were free. There were a lot of exciting offers. Then slowly they started charging the parking. Then they started charging for the bags. Now people have happily come back to the Kirana store. I've seen my house, surrounding houses. So malls, the number of footfalls have gone down drastically in malls. People have gone back to the Kirana shop. So what I call is a temporary phenomena. Malls. They're not going to be there for long.
Yeah, one of the misconceptions being spread about the issue of the society is that most of the Brahmins are fake, they're corrupt, they're liars, and especially thanks to Bollywood and television in India. And that's a misconception is spoken, and even in the US also. In the US, the problem is the temples, the Hindu community is so small. So temple is a natural place for people to meet. So in the India, US, the temple economy. And if local people do not support their own temples, then who is going to feed the Brahman and the other people? Because the governments are not funding it. The governments
Yeah.
are funding the mosques and the churches, but not the Hindu
Correct.
temples.
Correct.
So if people do not give to their own temples, where will they give? Or why should not they give? So what is your view on this? Because temple economics earlier used to be driven by the state. The state will put all their tax money, instead of putting in their own treasury, they'll give it to the temple. That's how you'll see records of somebody visiting Padmanabh Mandir, gave him 20 villages to Padmanabh, gave 2 tons of gold to Padmanabh, not for themselves, but to also the treasury is maintained at the temple. So the society is still rich. So,
See, the attack on sadhus or a Brahmins that you see is not very spontaneous or a one-off thing. It has been a very planned activity, and you have to go back in the history. There were sadhus who fought the army of Aurangzeb in Varanasi. They fought 25 times, and many times they had beaten them black and blue, and the army had to run away. When Britishers came, there was a sannyasi uprising which Bankim Chandra mentions in Anand Math also. And again, Britishers wanted them not to go to Puri temple, and all the Naga sadhu had come down and they killed many Britishers, few thousand British army. So they realized that they cannot live as long as sadhus are there and they are respected in the society. So independence movement, if you look, there's many sadhus. In fact, 52 pandas of Puri were hanged, and their left body was left hanging for a week, just because they have participated in uprising against British. So that is what the religions learned also, and the politicians learned. As long as sadhus will be respected by the Hindus, they will not be able to fool Hindus. So they started organized way depicting them, and what you see, the Palghar lynching that happened and government not taking any action, I call it as a plan by the religious conversion mafia and the government, which want to what you call keep Hindus suppressed. And on the other hand, they portray Brahmins in a negative way, especially in the serials. Now on the web series we see, so that people stop, common man also stops funding them. So they want to squeeze them out of the system. So the government is not paying them, the temple money is not going to them, and they now want common man to hate them. So that is being done in a very organized way, but it's a temporary phenomena. Hindus are realizing it. More and more young generation is understanding what is happening and how organized Brahmins and sadhus are being targeted, and will not let them succeed.
yeah, most of the people don't realize the Indian independence movement, the biggest fighters against the colonial attacks by both faith-based colonialists, both Islam as well as Christianity, were the Brahmins, because they were the people who had ideas, and they could. I mean, their job was to think for the society. So it's not something they're doing a great, they're doing not doing charity to anyone, but that was their work, to protect the society from ideological attacks. And they all attacked sadhus, because the sadhus, India still is a very dharmic country as compared to any other country in the planet. And sadhus did a wonderful work. Even today they did. 2014, if it was not for the sadhus, Narendra Modi would not have come.
Correct.
And Sonia Gandhi propped her of her own sadhus, but ultimately she failed, because all those sadhus came out to be crooks. So now we have, so what is, so again, that is connected to the temples. So this phenomena, do you think that has people are now beginning to respect that what they were told against the Brahmana was not true, or people are still in the same campaign, they're still driven by or convinced by the same old campaign, the sadhus are bad, Charvak philosophy?
So I'll put it that today we are in the middle ground where people have started questioning that what everything was told to us was correct.
Hmm.
Are sadhus really bad? Are Brahmins really bad? There's a small segment who have changed their opinion that no, what they were being taught or told was wrong. But still, a lot of work needs to be done, and we need to keep on at it consistently. You know, and we don't give it up, because this is a part of civilizational war, and civilizational war are not fought for one generation; they are fought for generations, and they're continuous till you are there. So the religions will try to wipe out the dharmic people, and dharmic people will have to keep fighting. We have come back to the brink. We've been pushed back, and we can't go back further. So thankfully, we have started retaliating it intellectually, and more people have started speaking. And I meet a lot of people who are youngsters at their age. I didn't understand as much as they understand now. So that's a good part of it, and that understanding has to start percolating down, so that the kid in class one understand what he is, what his dharma is, and he learns how to stand for it, and will get at it, will do it, will achieve that.
Thank you, Sandeep Singh ji. Such a wonderful talk. And viewers, if you like this conversation on temple economics, do comment on the YouTube video. And also, it will be premiered in a week's time. And then let us keep the conversation on. Sandeep ji will continue this talk, and now we'll go deep into each of these topics.
Sure.
Thank you. Namaskar.